Listen to me very carefully, because this is not a gentle word and this is not a comfortable message. This is a moment that divides yesterday from tomorrow, and it all rests on you. What you do next is not small. What you decide next is not ordinary. Heaven is watching. The unseen realm is leaning in, and time itself is holding its breath, because everything you have been calling an ending, everything you have feared was unavoidable, everything you assumed would collapse, is standing on the edge of change just because of you. You have told yourself the story that you are too late, too weak, too ordinary, too damaged to matter. You have rehearsed that lie until it sounded like truth. But I am telling you now, with absolute conviction, that God has never ended a story because of lack. God ends cycles because of obedience. The reason this ends tomorrow is not because the world changes overnight. It is because you change tonight. God has placed a moment in your hands, and what you do with it will echo longer than you can imagine. You see, God does not wait for crowds to move history. God waits for one heart to align. When one person dares to believe beyond evidence, when one person refuses to bow to fear, when one person stands up while everyone else sits down in resignation, something shifts in the spiritual atmosphere. What others call coincidence, God calls response. What others call luck, God calls alignment. And what others call the end, God calls the doorway to a new beginning. You have been staring at walls, calling them permanent. You have been looking at closed doors, calling them final. But God has been watching you, waiting to see if you will dare to speak faith into silence, waiting to see if you will act when nothing around you agrees, waiting to see if you will trust God's word over your own feelings. Because God does not move in reaction to panic, God moves in response to faith. There is a reason pressure has intensified. There is a reason resistance has increased. There is a reason the battle feels personal. It is because the moment is critical. When God is about to shift the season, the weight always increases before the release. You thought the heaviness meant defeat, but it actually means proximity. You are closer than you think, closer than you feel, closer than your circumstances suggest. Do not misunderstand this moment. Tomorrow does not change because circumstances suddenly improve. Tomorrow changes because you refuse to remain the same. God has already released what you have been praying for, but it is waiting on your alignment. Faith is not a feeling. Faith is a decision to stand on what God has said, even when everything around you contradicts it. Faith is the courage to act while still trembling. Faith is obedience without guarantees. You have been waiting for confidence, but God has been waiting for obedience. Confidence comes after movement, not before it. Strength follows action, not contemplation. God never asked you to feel ready. God asked you to trust. And trust is proven in motion, not in tension. Look back at your life honestly. Every breakthrough you have ever experienced came after a moment when you could have quit. Every victory was preceded by a season of doubt. Every elevation came after humiliation. God does not waste pain. God does not overlook tears. God does not ignore the silent battles you fought when no one applauded you. What you thought was delay was actually preparation. You have been shaped in secret for a public victory. You have been refined in obscurity for visible impact. God was not punishing you. God was building capacity in you. If the blessing had arrived earlier, it would have crushed you. If the door had opened sooner, you would not have been able to sustain what came through it. God's timing is not slow, it is precise. This is why it ends tomorrow. Not because the problem disappears, but because you stop agreeing with it. Not because opposition vanishes, but because you rise above it. Not because fear leaves, but because it no longer controls you. The moment you stop partnering with doubt, its power breaks. The moment you stop rehearsing failure, its grip loosens. The moment you choose to believe God more than you believe your history, the future shifts. Do you understand the authority God has placed inside you? You have been speaking defeat over your life with the same mouth God intended for faith. Words are not harmless. Words shape reality. Words align you either with fear or with God's promises. You cannot keep declaring loss and expect victory. You cannot keep speaking death over dreams and expect them to live. God responds to what you speak, not what you wish. Tomorrow changes when you change your confession. Tomorrow changes when you stop saying, I can't, and start saying, God is able. Tomorrow changes when you stop magnifying the problem and start magnifying God. The size of God in your life is revealed by what you talk about most. If fear dominates your speech, it will dominate your direction. If faith dominates your speech, it will dominate your outcome. You are not powerless. You are not forgotten. You are not overlooked. God has been patient with you, not because you were failing, but because you were growing. God does not rush what must be rooted. God does not hurry what must mature. And now the season is shifting. Not because you have perfected everything, but because you are willing to trust God fully. There is something God is asking you to release tonight. Something you have been holding on to out of fear, pride, or familiarity. You know exactly what it is. That one habit, that one mindset, that one relationship, that one excuse. You have justified it, defended it, and hidden it, but God has been gently pressing your heart. Not to condemn you, but to free you. You cannot step into the new while clinging to the old. Tomorrow cannot begin if yesterday is still in your hands. God's call is always forward, always upward, always deeper. Comfort is the enemy of calling. Familiarity can become a prison if you refuse to move when God says move. You have outgrown where you are, and that discomfort you feel is not confusion, it is confirmation. God is stirring you because stagnation is no longer allowed. Do not wait for permission from people who are afraid of change. Do not seek validation from those who benefit from your silence. God did not place destiny inside you for approval. God placed it there for impact. When God speaks, obedience must be immediate. Delayed obedience is disguised disobedience. And tonight, God is calling you to act. You may not know all the steps, but you know the first one. Take it. You may not see the whole path, but you see enough to move forward. Move. God does not reveal the full plan to those who refuse to begin. Light comes to motion, not hesitation. The moment you step out, the way appears. This is not about perfection. This is about surrender. This is about trust. This is about deciding that God's word has more authority than your fear. You have prayed for change, but prayer must be followed by alignment. You have asked God to move, but God is waiting for you to move. Heaven responds to faith in action. Think about it. What if the pain you have endured was not meant to destroy you, but to awaken you? What if the struggle was not punishment, but preparation? What if tomorrow is not the end of something precious, but the end of something limiting? God does not end things to harm you. God ends things to advance you. The chapter that closes tomorrow closes because it has taught you everything it could. The season that ends tomorrow ends because it has fulfilled its purpose. Holding on to it longer will not bring growth, only delay. Trust God enough to let go. Trust God enough to step forward. Trust God enough to believe that what is ahead is greater than what is behind. You are not starting from nothing. You are starting from experience. You are starting from wisdom gained through struggle. You are starting from faith forged in fire. God has been building resilience in you. God has been strengthening your spiritual backbone. God has been preparing you to carry more than you ever thought possible. Tomorrow does not belong to fear. Tomorrow does not belong to regret. Tomorrow belongs to those who dare to believe God. And tonight is the line. Tonight is the decision. Tonight is the moment when excuses lose their power and faith takes its place. Do not underestimate the weight of a single decision made in alignment with God. One choice can end years of cycles. One act of obedience can dismantle generations of limitation. One moment of courage can unlock doors you never imagined would open. God specializes in sudden shifts, but they're always preceded by a willing heart. This is why it all ends tomorrow. Not because God suddenly notices you, but because you finally respond. Not because the enemy grows weaker, but because your faith grows stronger. Not because the world changes, but because your alignment with God becomes unshakable. Stand up in your spirit, lift your head, straighten your posture. You were not created to shrink back. You were not designed to live beneath your calling. God has placed authority in you to rise, to speak, to act, to believe. Use it, activate it, walk in it. Refuse to let another day pass ruled by fear. Refuse to let another night steal your peace. Refuse to let another voice override what God has spoken into your heart. You know the truth. You feel the stirring. You sense the urgency. This is not pressure. This is purpose calling you forward. When tomorrow arrives, let it find you different. Let it find you standing in faith. Let it find you aligned with God's will. Let it find you free from what once held you. Let it find you moving, believing, trusting, obeying. Because when one person decides to fully trust God, endings become beginnings, chains become testimonies, and impossibilities become realities. And the shift that follows does not announce itself with noise, but with quiet authority, unfolding step by step as faith continues to move, speak, and stand in agreement with God's power, presence, and promise, without turning back, without retreating, without surrendering ground that was claimed the moment the heart chose obedience over fear, trust over doubt, and alignment with God over everything else. Do not think for a moment that God is moved by noise alone. God is moved by alignment. Many speak loudly, but few stand firmly. Many desire change, but few are willing to become the kind of person who can carry it. This is why God has been working on you inwardly before anything changes outwardly. The foundation must be strengthened before the structure rises. God builds from the inside out, and what God builds lasts. You have been asking why the road has been narrow, why the support has been scarce, why encouragement has come in small portions. It is because God was teaching you to lean fully on Him. Dependence on people creates disappointment, but dependence on God creates endurance. When God becomes your source, circumstances lose their authority over your peace. When God becomes your anchor, storms no longer decide your direction. Understand this clearly. God is not intimidated by your weakness. God is attracted to surrender. When you stop pretending to be strong and start trusting God's strength, power flows. Pride blocks movement, but humility opens doors. The moment you say, God, I cannot do this without you, you step into a realm where ability begins to collapse. You have been measuring yourself against others, wondering why their progress seems faster, their results louder, their journey smoother. But God never called you to comparison. God called you to obedience. Your path is custom designed. Your timing is intentional. What God is producing in you requires depth, not speed. If God rushed the process, the purpose would be compromised. There are things God will only entrust to those who have learned to wait without bitterness, to serve without recognition, to believe without evidence. Character is currency in the unseen realm. Integrity carries weight where applause means nothing. God is preparing you for influence that does not corrupt and success that does not destroy. Do not misinterpret silence as absence. God is often most active when it feels quiet. Roots grow in darkness. Strength forms underground. What emerges strong has endured unseen pressure. You are not being ignored. You are being fortified. God is doing a deep work that surface level observation cannot detect. There is a difference between being busy and being fruitful. You have been busy surviving, but now God is calling you to be fruitful. Survival mode ends when trust begins. Fruitfulness flows from alignment, not exhaustion. God never intended for you to live drained, anxious, and constantly striving. God intended for you to live anchored, focused, and led. Let go of the belief that rest is weakness. Rest is trust in action. When you rest, you declare that God is in control. When you rest, you silence fear's demand to overexert. Rest does not mean inaction. It means movement without panic. It means obedience without anxiety. It means faith without striving. God is teaching you to move with discernment, not desperation. Desperation reacts. Discernment responds. When you are led by God, you no longer chase every opportunity. You recognize the right one. You no longer fight every battle. You choose the ones God has already secured. You have been tempted to compromise just to escape discomfort. But understand this, what you gain through compromise will demand continuous compromise to keep. God's way may be slower, but it is secure. God's way may be demanding, but it is sustaining. God's way may cost you convenience, but it will never cost you peace. The reason this moment feels weighty is because destiny is near. Decision always precedes direction. Heaven honors clarity. When you decide to trust God fully, confusion begins to lift. When you decide to obey God completely, resistance loses its grip. Half-hearted faith produces unstable ground, but wholehearted trust produces unshakable footing. God is calling you to stop revisiting old wounds for validation. Your pain does not define you, God's purpose does. Healing begins when you stop asking why it happened and start asking what God wants to build through it. The past can inform you, but it must not imprison you. God redeems, restores, and repurposes what was meant to break you. You are not delayed because you failed. You were delayed because you were being redirected. Some paths you prayed to walk would have led you away from God's will. Some doors you cried over were protecting you. God closes with mercy and opens with wisdom. Trust the hand that guides even when the way feels unfamiliar. This is a call to maturity, to stop needing constant reassurance, to stop demanding signs for every step, to walk by trust, not by sight. God does not reveal everything at once because revelation grows responsibility. What you know must match what you can carry. God will not overload you. God will grow you. You are stepping into a season where excuses will no longer work. God is inviting you higher, and higher ground requires stronger footing. Old habits will not survive where you are going. Old mindsets cannot breathe at new levels. God is not taking something from you without replacing it with something better. Let faith become your language. Let trust become your posture. Let obedience become your rhythm. You were not created to live reacting to circumstances. You were created to live responding to God. When God leads, fear follows at a distance. When God speaks, chaos loses its voice. Tomorrow does not simply arrive, it is entered. And it is entered by those who have decided that God's truth is final, that God's promise is sufficient, that God's presence is enough. When you move in agreement with God, even uncertainty becomes a pathway, even resistance becomes refinement, even waiting becomes strength. And the unfolding ahead carries a weight of purpose that continues to expand as the heart remains yielded, the spirit remains alert, and trust remains anchored in God without retreat, without dilution, without returning to what has already been outgrown. Do not underestimate the sacred power of awareness. The moment you become conscious of what God is doing within you, you step out of confusion and into clarity. Many live distracted, unaware that God has been signaling, shaping, and summoning them all along. Awareness, harpens obedience. Awareness transforms ordinary moments into divine encounters. When you recognize God's hand at work, resistance begins to lose its authority over your heart. God is not asking you to become someone else. God is calling you to become fully who you were created to be. The struggle you have faced was never meant to erase your identity. It was meant to refine it. Pressure reveals essence. Fire exposes substance. What remains after trial is what God intended from the beginning. There is a holy distinction between delay and denial. Delay matures purpose. Denial redirects destiny. God has delayed certain things not to withhold joy, but to deepen capacity. The weight of what is coming requires a strengthened inner life. God will not place overflow into a fractured vessel. Restoration precedes expansion. Listen closely. You cannot keep asking God to bless what you refuse to surrender. Blessing flows where alignment exists. God's favor rests where humility lives. When you release control, God releases clarity. When you release fear, God releases peace. Surrender is not loss, it is access. You have been trained by hardship to endure, but now God is training you to trust. Endurance kept you alive. Trust will make you effective. There is a shift happening in your spirit from survival to significance. God is moving you from merely holding on to intentionally moving forward. The voice you obey determines the future you experience. If you obey fear, you will inherit limitation. If you obey doubt, you will inherit delay. But if you obey God, you will inherit transformation. Obedience is not passive. It is an active alignment with divine authority. It is choosing goal. D's instruction over emotional impulse. God is calling you to stop negotiating with what must be confronted. Some battles cannot be avoided, they must be faced. Avoidance prolongs captivity. Confrontation, guided by God, produces freedom. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is the refusal to let fear decide. There is a sacred discipline in consistency. Breakthrough does not belong to the sporadic, it belongs to the faithful. God honors those who show up even when results are invisible. Consistent faith builds momentum in the unseen. What you repeat in obedience becomes powerful over time. Do not confuse simplicity with insignificance. God often moves through simple acts of faith that appear small to the natural eye. A single step taken in trust can dismantle years of stagnation. God multiplies what is offered sincerely, not what is performed impressively. You have been seeking certainty, but God is cultivating conviction. Certainty depends on evidence. Conviction depends on trust. Evidence follows obedience, not the other way around. God asks you to move before you see so that you learn to rely on Him rather than outcomes. This is the season where internal alignment matters more than external applause. God is not impressed by image, God is moved by integrity. When no one is watching, your choices still echo. What you nurture in secret shapes what you manifest in public. You are being called to live deliberately, to choose your thoughts, to guard your words, to discipline your focus. A distracted mind cannot carry a directed life. God brings clarity where attention is disciplined. What you focus on expands, what you submit to God transforms. Do not allow disappointment to rewrite your expectations. Past pain does not get authority over future promise. God's faithfulness is not diminished by your previous experiences. Every new season requires renewed trust. Faith must be present tense to remain alive. God is inviting you to step beyond comfort into calling. Comfort preserves, calling stretches. Preservation maintains what is. Calling produces what should be. You were not created merely to exist safely. You were created to live purposefully under God's direction. Let go of the need to be understood by everyone. Divine assignments are often misunderstood by those not called to carry them. Validation from God outweighs approval from people. When God affirms you, misunderstanding loses its sting. You are not responsible for controlling outcomes. You are responsible for obeying direction. God manages results. You manage response. Release the burden of control and accept the strength of trust. God's governance is flawless even when the process feels complex. There is a maturity forming in you that does not seek spectacle. It seeks substance. It does not demand attention. It commands respect through consistency. God is shaping you into someone whose presence carries peace, whose words carry weight, whose life reflects alignment. Remember this, God never wastes a willing heart. Every act of obedience is recorded. Every step of faith is seen. Every moment of trust matters. What feels unnoticed is being honored. What feels slow is being secured. This continuation is not about urgency born of fear. It's about movement born of conviction. God is steady. God is intentional. God is faithful. As you remain yielded, attentive, and responds, The unfolding ahead continues with precision, depth, and authority, guided not by impulse, but by trust, not by pressure, but by purpose, not by uncertainty, but by a growing awareness that God is present, active, and leading every step forward as alignment deepens and resolve becomes unshakable. Now hear this with a still and open heart. This is the moment where reflection must turn into resolve. Not tomorrow, not someday, now. God has spoken enough to awaken you. What remains is your response. Do not let this moment pass as another emotional experience. Let it become a defining decision. Stand honestly before God and examine your ways, your priorities, your surrender. What you tolerate today will shape who you become tomorrow. Let your heart return to reverence. Let your mind return to truth. Let your will return to obedience. God is not distant from you. God is near, attentive, and ready to walk with those who choose alignment over resistance. Draw closer not with words alone, but with a life that reflects trust. Lay down what has distracted you. Release what has hardened you. Step away from what has slowly pulled your heart from God's presence. You do not need to become extraordinary overnight. You need to become sincere. God responds to sincerity with power. A humble heart moves heaven more than loud declarations. Choose to live awake, intentional, and anchored. Choose to seek God not only in crisis, but in daily devotion. When God becomes your first pursuit, everything else finds its rightful place. Let this be the turning point where fear loses its grip, where excuses lose their voice, where obedience becomes your joy. Walk forward with quiet confidence, knowing that God goes before you, stands with you, and strengthens you within. You are not walking alone, and you are not walking without purpose. May your steps be steady, your faith be active, and your heart remain tender before God. May your life reflect alignment, courage, and trust. Rise from this moment with renewed resolve, carrying a faith that is lived, not just spoken, and a devotion that is visible in every choice, every word, and every step as you walk closer to God with unwavering trust and a heart fully yielded.